Welcome back to another edition of Inwarp Mag. I am Brooke, joined as always by my co-host Drew.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
And today we're going to do something a little different. We have both started reading some of the Horus Heresy books, and Drew just got done with book 1, and we thought it would be a lot of fun to go through the Horus Heresy together and do some book reviews of the Horus Heresy novels, especially as new players and new to the setting. And we thought this would be a fun journey to get through this whole Horus Heresy. Maybe eventually, we'll see how it goes. So we'll see if you guys like it, and if we like it, and we'll see how far we get.
Yeah, if you're considering reading it too, might be a good starting point for you to get into it now, and it could be kind of like a little book club thing. So we're going to try to structure this episode so that and any future episodes where we do book reviews, we're going to put spoilers at the end, and we'll make sure that we add chapters for you so that when we are getting towards the spoiler section, you can just skip forward to like our conclusions about the book, and you can read along with us, and you can listen to this episode without worrying about us spoiling the ending of the book for you.
Right. And I think as the first book of us doing this, and you guys, we didn't really give any warning of us doing this, but we'll definitely do a spoiler-free section at the front, up front. And when we get towards the spoilers, we'll definitely give that warning out. And without further ado, I think we should probably just get into it.
Yeah, so the first book is called Horus Rising. Do you want me to give like a brief synopsis or summary of it?
Is at a high level without giving any spoilers.
So basically, this book introduces the Luna Wolves, and it kind of goes through introducing some of the Mournival, which is, I don't know if
Mortival. Yep.
The Mournival is like the leadership group.
Whatever.
Yeah, so the Luna Wolves are one of the Space Marine legions. They are led by Horus, who is the War Master. So basically, the Emperor has gone back to Terra, and he has chosen one of his sons to become, the new War Master, to take his place in leading all of the Space Marine legions while he goes back to Terra. And he selected, I guess, his favorite son, Horus, to lead everybody. And we start the book, and this I don't think is a spoiler at all, but we start the book with the point of view of a character named Gabriel Loken.
Yep.
And he is just like your run-of-the-mill Space Marine, I would say. He's like a captain, and he's leading some Space Marines in a mission. And
yep, it's him and 3 other companies that are assaulting a city as part of the crusade. So the Great Crusade. But
this all takes place also like in 30,000 instead of 40,000.
Right. This is a 30K novel. It's the 31st millennium. So this is all leading up to the heresy when it actually happens. But so the actual start of the book is 31st millennium.
So then, like, brief synopsis level of the book, we are introduced to kind of our main point of view character, Gabriel Loken. We get to learn about him. We get to learn about the leadership structure of the Luna Wolves with the Mournival, and we see different events of Horus kind of taking his first steps as being the War Master for all the Space Marine legions, and what leads to him basically making the change to go from the Luna Wolves to becoming the Sons of Horus.
Right. And there'll be, throughout the book, there are hints at things that are going on, whether that is at a Legion level or like the Imperium level. They have certain encounters that may inform certain decisions that they make later. But it's all things that are, grains of salt or grains of sand that make a heap kind of thing. It's things that are kind of happening, as they're trying to keep pursuing this great crusade. and this is kind of that first set of adventures following the Luna Wolves, and kind of going down that path of you'll start to see changes in this legion with Horus, and especially with Horus, but you'll see some changes. You'll start to see, the cracks that might start to hint at the heresy happening later.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not really a spoiler if you've looked at the series or if you've followed Warhammer at all. You've probably heard of the Horus Heresy. So, Horus is doing something that's a heresy at some point.
The book series is literally called the Horus Heresy, so it's impossible to spoil that, I think.
Yeah, I think the most important thing of this book is this is like pre any of the heresy stuff. It's all about the Luna Wolves before, they become Sons of Horus, and before any of the heresy stuff. It's just kind of introducing the Luna Wolves Space Marines Legion and just kind of giving you an insight to what they're all about and what they're going through, and just kind of giving you a point of view of like what they are thinking based off of some of the events that are happening to them during their current crusades.
And the other interesting part about this too is it does follow the Space Marines, obviously, the Luna Wolves, and some of the other Space Marine legions that show up in the book. But you also get a point of view from other characters that are in the Imperium, but they're not Space Marines. So like you have Euphrates Keeler, you have Carcassy, Ignace Carcassy. They're a couple of remembrancers who are basically like historians for the Imperium, and they get added to the Great Crusade. They get to go on all the expedition fleets and get to chronicle their great deeds that they accomplish on the crusade. So you have these remembrancers, you get their points of view of certain events. You also have he's called an iterator, Kirill Sindamin, and he is like a confidant to our main character Loken. And you get to have his like interactions with Loken, as well as a point of view from him being an iterator. An iterator is basically like a speaker and a writer and somebody that like, is really good with words. Somebody that he can go to and bounce ideas off of and kind of learn some history from him and that sort of thing. So it's cool that in these books, you obviously want to hear about the Space Marines, and you're going to get a ton of Space Marines, but you also get these points of view from non-Space Marines that kind of inform perception of the legions. It kind of gives you the perspective of non-Space Marines and how they view these effectively demigod people and the Primarchs and stuff. Like you get to hear that in this book, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's a 3-part book, and kind of each part of the book takes place in a different planet. So there's a lot of different settings to the book, which make it pretty interesting. Some of the parts are longer than the other. I thought like the last part was really short, but
yeah,
I think it wrapped up pretty well, even though it was so short.
Yeah, I think the third part is a good end cap to this part of the story. It is like the other parts are kind of leading up to it, and you're kind of seeing how the Luna Wolves operate, and you're seeing how the Crusade is operated, and like you're seeing how people interact with each other, and you're kind of seeing the ins and outs of the Legion. And then the third part, it feels like you don't see all these like weird like political things or maybe like military decisions and whatever. Like you don't see as much of that, and it kind of is like a very slimmed down like narrative following how this all plays out, and it's a really good end of the book. I think it's a good finale.
Mm-hmm. So like, what were some of your initial impressions of the book, like without spoilers? Like, first off, did you read the book or did you listen to it as an audiobook?
So I was listening to it as an audiobook, and I highly recommend the audiobook for people that want to maybe pick this up. The audiobook is exceptionally good. The voice actor or the narrator, he's very good, and he does different voices for all the characters that are not like off-putting or anything like that. It actually makes sense, and you can actually, when that person is talking, you can actually be like, oh yeah, that's that person. I can picture who that is. and he does an exceptionally good job. I've read I've read several books after this. He is my favorite. This narrator does books 1 through 3, and he's my favorite narrator. That probably because of books 1 through 3, I was just they're my first books, but he does an exceptional job. They're not none of them are bad, but he does a really good job. My initial thoughts though, when I first picked up this book, I put it down almost immediately. I didn't like it at first, to be honest, but I stopped at the wrong spot. So no spoilers, but I will just mention as spoiler free as I possibly can, and I won't give you any spoilers. But when you're introduced to Ignacy Carcassy, who is the Remembrancer, who is the poet, when he has his introduction chapter, I stopped reading in the middle of that because I was like, I don't know where this is going. It's boring. I'm confused. I don't know what the hell's happening. And I put it down. And then I eventually picked it back up and I started reading or listening to it again. And I got to the end of that chapter and it was like, oh, that was like, it makes sense now. Like why we were following this guy. I didn't really understand it. And it like drew me in immediately after I got through that chapter. And then once I got through that and I got through the end of the first part hooked me for the rest of the first 3 books. Basically, it got me immediately invested. It's a book that it starts slow, and I think this is kind of true for a lot of the books in the Horus Heresy. It starts a little slow, but then you'll start to get into like the main plot that they're trying to follow, and then it hooks you. And that's how it is for me. It took me a while to actually get into it. That first initial picking up the book was rough, but I'm glad I actually persevered because I really, really enjoyed this book. What about you? Your initial thoughts and what you thought when you first picked it up?
Yeah, I thought part 1 was a little slow too. I actually was like getting to the same part you were speaking of in the book where it introduces that character. Well, never remember his name, but when I hear
Carcassy,
Carcassy, I go, yeah, he's that Remembrancer guy. Yeah, part 1 was a little slow. Like the intro of the book is really good. Like the intro of the book will draw you in, but then after the intro of the book, it gets slow for like the next 4 or 5 chapters, and you're just like, but there's a lot to introduce, so like you have to keep in mind that this, like, if you don't know anything about Warhammer at all, this could be your first introduction into like Space Marines and the Luna Wolves and stuff like that. So it's like a lot of introductions as far as characters and the structure of the Space Marines Legion. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be introduced to you before the plot can really get going. So
yeah, that's very true. There's a lot of upfront information that they're trying to give you so that you have context to what you're even reading, because otherwise you'd probably be completely lost.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have to. I agree with you. I listened to the book. I would recommend people listen to the audiobook unless you really, really love reading to yourself. Go for it. But if you're like us and you don't necessarily have time to do that, the audiobook was really good. The narrator was good. I listened to it on like 1.2 speed, which was good. For a little while I had trouble like hearing certain words he was saying. Like I'm like, when he was saying Mornival, I was like, what the heck is he saying? I had to like look it up to see what it was, and I was like, okay. Stuff like that where it's just like you didn't like Carcassy or whatever. Like I hear the name but I don't see it, so it's hard for me to remember.
Yeah. I'm the same way with names. All the names are hard to follow, which I guess that's another thing about this. There's a ton of names in these books, and it can be a little overwhelming because they're just throwing people at you, and you're like, I don't know who's important. I don't know whose name I actually care about, and they're just giving you names constantly. and you're like, I don't know who anybody is. And then like as you go on in the book, you start to understand who's important and whose names actually kind of matter. And then like later on in the book, when you hear other names, you're like, oh yeah, isn't that like one guy like that they referenced one time? And you're like, oh yeah, I think it's him. Like I have like a context, I guess, like when you describe him and when he talks, you're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember him. I don't really remember his name, but I remember that guy. But like that's all, I think, credit to the audiobook and in the voice of the narration that guy does. Um,
One thing
yeah.
that kept throwing me off when I was listening to it is every time they would say Loken, 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 I thought he was saying Logan for like the first couple of chapters, and I was like Logan. I'm like Logan Grimnar. I'm like, what the heck is he doing with the Luna Wolves? Like, I was so confused there for a while because I thought he kept calling him Logan, and I was
Yeah.
like, the only Logan I can think of in Warhammer 40k is Logan
Grimnar.
Grimnar. Yeah. So I was really confused for a while, and I think I messaged you, and I'm at one point I was like, is Logan Grimnar in the Luna Wolves or something?
Yeah.
So
I
that
want to I want to give the voice actor credit because we keep referencing him. His name is Toby Longworth. He does an exceptional job, but I just wanted to add that because I looked it up.
mm, yeah, so that could have been part of the problem of listening at 1.2 speed, but I like the books to like not be super long, so I like to listen to them a little bit faster, but
I
the
I
rest
did listen to it. I did listen to it in 1.0 time speed. I just normal speed.
mm,
And I really enjoyed it. I think, but I'm not trying to get through them in any particular amount of time, I guess. So like if you're okay with that, it reads well. Like the pace of him of the narrator speaking is good, so you're not going to be like, oh come on, like hurry up. He has good pacing. So if you're okay with that, like normal talking speed, then it's great.
yeah, his narration was fun. I just it was like 16 hours versus like 11 hours, and I was like, I want to get done in 11 hours, especially so we could like
Yeah.
review it.
So, what drew you to the book besides me telling you that you should read the book?
uh,
Did anything, or is it just that?
Probably just like I've heard a lot about the Horus Heresy through like different YouTube channels. There's the oh my gosh, what the heck, Wes Hammer.
Oh
I've
yeah,
watched a lot of his videos where he talks about various 40k and Horus Heresy type lore and stuff. So like, I feel like I know a lot about it, but I've never read it myself. So I just have now that I'm much more into 40k. I just feel like it's almost like a rite of passage to start reading some of the actual lore and stuff like that to like have a better appreciation of the setting of the game. So that was really my draw into it. How about
yeah,
yours?
that's fair. I mean, kind of the same thing. The first thing that got me into 40k was, I mean, honestly, it was the lore, and I was following different YouTubers who were doing lore videos, and and then eventually I was like, I should just start reading the Horus Heresy because I like Space Marines and I want to know how the Horus Heresy happened. And this is a super long book series that if it's good, then I have a super long book series to read, which is cool. You have something that you can keep coming back to and reading and being entertained with. So I kind of just took a dive, and I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I was pleasantly surprised because I think these books are actually pretty good. There are certain critiques that I have of them, but I think generally they're pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
They're well. The world is well built around the books. The books describe it well. It's not like stuff that I just know meta wise. It's like the books do a great job of building the world out, and that kept me reading. It kept me going. It's very thematic. It's very it's very 40k. Like grimdark. All that. Like it does all that stuff really well. So it makes you want to keep reading if you like those themes.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of themes, I know it's been a while for you since you read the book. I've read it more recently. Do you feel like there's any main themes that are explored in the book?
Yeah. So the three that I had were for loyalty, ambition, and betrayal. Um, so with loyalty, um, you get a huge theme of that, obviously with the Space Marines. You start to explore like their loyalty to the Primarch, especially that because you'll get their literal point of view, them talking about their loyalty to Horus, or other points of view. Um, you even see it from like a like the Remembrancers, who are not literally sons of Horus. Like they're not literally his gene seed, but you see their loyalty to him as well, which is fascinating because it's almost a uh, I don't want to say cult like following, but it kind of is because they're so like with him that they'll just follow him to the end of the earth, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with that loyalty, there's events in the book that start to test it. They start to test the loyalty. Our main character Loken has experiences that test his loyalty, and like his trust and stuff like that. It's definitely a theme with, especially with Loken, because he's such a good Marine, and he's definitely like a military guy. He's very smart. He's loyal to a fault, basically. And
Well,
you kind of
also touching on the loyalty aspect is kind of like the overall synopsis of the book, where it's like the transition from the Luna Wolves to becoming the Sons of Horus. The whole loyalty aspect of it kind of wraps up into that as well, where it's just Horus himself deals with incidents where his leadership is being questioned by other legions, and he might be doubting himself, but he needs the loyalty of the Space Marines, the way that they were loyal to the Emperor. He needs them to follow him and not doubt his orders, for the crusade. So
right.
like part of the name change of becoming the Luna Wolves to the Sons of Horus is like, I need all of the Space Marine legions to understand that I am the leader of the Luna Wolves. Like, there's no doubt of who is in command. Like, we are the Sons of Horus. We're not the Luna Wolves, just the Luna Wolves. So,
Right. It's also it's like that legion pledging. It's almost like a legion wide pledge to Horus
as the
as
War
their war
Master.
master, right? And it's a big deal with that name change. Like it kind of ripples throughout the whole Imperium. Like everybody is like, oh my god, this is crazy. They changed their name to be the Sons of Horus. So it's a big deal. It's not just like a simple name change. It's not just a rebranding. It's a complete change to their personality as a legion, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess the next one would be ambition. Also power wrapped into this. So this is mostly portrayed in Horus, in Horus's own uh his own like way that he leads, and like how he's trying to shape the war effort, like the crusade. He's trying to shape it in his image, and like how he deals with the responsibility of being war master. And he has more power, and he has power over his own brothers now as war master, and him trying to navigate that is a interesting part of this, because he does actually interact with some of his brothers in the book. Um, and like those interactions are interesting to follow because now that he's War Master, he's viewed slightly differently, and that changes how the brothers treat him, and that kind of changes his own perspective of like his responsibility as War Master now, instead of just I'm just leading the 63rd Crusade or whatever it was, or 63rd expedition. Like instead of just being another one of the guys leading an expedition, he is now in charge of all the expeditions, and that weighs on him in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. Also, the ambition part would also be Horus's ambition to basically live up to the Emperor, because the Emperor is gone now, and for all of the Crusades for the Space Marines, they've been led by the Emperor, and now they're being led by Horus. So he, has the ambitions to live up to his father's leadership abilities and be able to just step into his place and lead all the Space Marines Legion. And so it's they're big shoes to fill, and he has the ambition to do it. It's just, can Horus do it?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely an interesting narrative, like as you follow Horus, and this is one of the books that I think follows Horus maybe closer than others. But it's interesting that you actually kind of get the insights of Horus as a person and how he views his own existence and his own duty as War Master. It's super interesting because as people who are on the periphery of 40K, and you see these Primarchs and you have no idea what how the Primarchs are, and they're supposed to be these like godlike figures, and then you actually get to see their thoughts. It's kind of cool, actually. You get to see how they view themselves and their duty, and they have self-doubts. It makes them very human. That's the human part of them, which is cool. It makes them relatable. So yeah, I really like that about, like, that's one of the themes that I really like about this book.
Yeah, like Horus, you have to imagine just like it's not like you're, I don't know, Horus stepping in to become the leader in place of the Emperor isn't like stepping in like, oh, I'm president of the United States now. I've been newly elected the president of the United States. Like, that would be an easier job than becoming basically the replacement of Emperor of mankind for all of time, where he has to lead everybody on these crusades. So like, just imagine all the self-doubt that you would have. Like, this guy's been leading us forever. Like, how can I step into his shoes? And the Emperor's kind of portrayed as godlike. So it's just like,
Right.
they're a step down from him. They're his sons, and it's just like, how can we live up to the Emperor? So imagine all of the self-doubt you would have if you were thrust into that leadership position, and you have all of your brothers who were probably equally qualified for the position, but maybe they had fallen out of favor with the Emperor, and they didn't get named War Master.
And there are other sons who thought that they should be War Master, and then like Horus was chosen, say you were chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And he has doubts. Like, he's like, maybe that person would have been better, but he chose me for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like, we're kind of already talking about the characters, and Horus is definitely one of the main characters. Do you have any more themes you want to talk about before we move into like characters and development of those characters?
We can touch on this briefly, but the other theme is like the corruption / betrayal of the Legion, and there are hints at things that are like basically happening within the Legion that will lead to possible betrayal and corruption, and like there's things that you see in this book and things that are happening even outside the Legion that hint at some other things of seeds being sown.
I would say part 3 definitely has this theme.
Yes, I would say after you know what I'm talking about. After part 1, there is a remembrancer that does some stuff. That those seeds are sown for something later. That's like, you're starting to see something develop there that is going to start to show more as the book series goes on. And you might know what I'm talking about. If not, that's fine. But there are things. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is there's things even outside the legions that are themes being sown into in this book of corruption, both good and bad, and betrayal, like going against their code, going against the imperial truth, that those sorts of things. There's things that are in play that will be explored later, which is cool looking back at this book, and you kind of see those things being hinted at. And I think in the next books, we'll start to explore those a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you'll have to remind me of what happened in part 1, because I don't fully remember it, but like part 3 definitely touches in the theme of corruption a lot. And when we talk about the actual like plot of the book with spoilers and stuff, it'll be really clear of like why. What it's not like full on. There is corruption happening. There's a lot of foreshadowing of the corruption to come.
Right. You'll have to remind me when we get to the spoilers to talk about that. But yeah, I'll clear that up when we get to the spoilers.
So let's talk a little bit about the main character, Loken. So just kind of overall discuss his development as a character, and we'll try not to give away any like any spoilers.
Sure. So I think I want to ask you first. What did you think of Loken as a character without revealing too much?
I think like I liked him at first, but the more you get to know him throughout the book, I just became bored with him. I hate to use the term Mary Sue, but he felt a bit like a Mary Sue character where he just kind of couldn't do anything wrong, which is probably fine if he's a POV character, but I don't know. Like I found myself gravitating and liking other characters better, like Abaddon. I liked him better because he actually had flaws and stuff, where they actually developed who he was as a character. And then when he made certain decisions or he said certain things in dialogue with like Horus, it made sense because it was like, oh, I can see why he's so heated in this conversation because Abaddon would want to do this. So,
Right.
like, that made sense. And it was just kind of like, it was almost like a joke in the book where, like, Horus is like, tell me what to do, Loken, because you're the wise one, like.
Oh, yeah.
It's just kind of like, just like eye roll. The beginning was fine, so, like, I don't think this is a spoiler because it's in the very first chapter, but the Luna Wolves are at a point where they lost one of their leaders of the Mournival, and they're looking for somebody to replace them. And they're looking among their captains for somebody who could step in and become another leader in the Luna Wolves. And Loken is that guy, spoiler, that is going to step into that role. But that's all in like the first 2 chapters or whatever. So, we're following Loken's change where he goes from just being like a captain, a lowly captain, to having to be one of the 4 guys who is the direct advisor to Horus.
Yeah, I mean I don't totally disagree with your assessment of him being kind of like a Mary Sue, for lack of a better term, a Mary what or I don't know,
Bobby Sue.
Bobby Sue. Yeah. I don't totally disagree with that. I think he obviously has become a captain in, we haven't seen this or whatever. Like he's obviously very good at what he does to be a captain. And then when he gets introduced as the, 4th member of the Mournival, like when you look at the other characters, you have Abaddon, Torgadon, and Aximand. And if you fit in Loken, he fits a role that the others don't fit. and it makes sense why he's chosen based on like his attributes and how when you get to know him, you start to see like, oh, he's very tactically sound. He's like a good soldier. He wants to, he doesn't let emotions really get the best of him. He's usually thinking logically, stuff like that. Like he's very good at what he does. He's very good at being a soldier.
Yeah, if he did
And
Jedi mind trick, he'd get it on the second try at least.
yeah, you'd use the Force and get it on the second try probably. But he fits with the other ones because you have, and this won't be spoilers, but like Abaddon is kind of brash. Torgadon is kind of lax a little bit and kind of jokes, doesn't take things always that seriously. But he's like, he's still like loyal, and he's maybe slightly passive, if anything. Aximand is like the snooty one, basically. Like he's kind of like,
is Aximand the one that they call Little Horus?
Yes, yeah, Little Horus. He looks, the reason they call him Little Horus for reference is that he looks exactly like Horus, basically. But he's just smaller, so they call him Little Horus. But he's kind of like arrogant because he thinks he's better than, like, he thinks that the Luna Wolves are better than other legions. He thinks that Space Marines are better than normal humans. Like he's kind of arrogant in that, and it shows a little bit. But then Loken is the brain. He's like literally the guy who they insert in there, and they're like, "You're gonna be the brain." Like we already have the muscle, we have the heart, we have the, I don't know.
Well, I would say Little Horus is also like very loyal to Horus.
Yes, extremely loyal to Horus.
Like there's a part in the book where they're kind of meeting, and it's just like they're like Loken is in awe of Horus, and Little Horus, Aximand or whatever, gives him some advice, and he's like, yeah, when you're in the meeting, like don't look directly at Horus, because if he calls on you, you're likely to just like
freeze
and not know what to say. So he's like, just look at his feet.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of informs on how he views Horus.
Yeah,
because he's just totally in awe of him.
Horus is like his god.
Yeah, for sure. He for sure is that way. But like, I think Loken, so he is very good at what he does, and he fits in nice with the Mournival. Like it makes sense that he joins them and that they selected him. But I think he kind of comes off as a he has like, I'm trying to think of the right word. He doesn't know as much as he would like to. Like he's almost like, I don't know, ignorance not the right word. He just doesn't like, he doesn't have the knowledge, and he's basing a lot of his decisions in his thinkings and his beliefs off of things that he's not privy to. He doesn't know things that he's just never been told. So he kind of goes off of those beliefs and assumptions, and it kind of leads him into bad situations sometimes. And it also, because he's so steadfast in whatever he's been taught and stuff like that, when he gets new information, it like absolutely like shatters his worldview. He's just like, I literally cannot rationalize this because I've been taught something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a hard time dealing with new information. And honestly, like with Horus in the Mournival, he almost acts, because he's so predictable, because he's been taught to do things a certain way, and he's been, he's a good boy, and he is a good soldier boy. He basically is so predictable that Horus kind of uses him. He's almost like an idiot. He's like a useful. He's just a useful idiot. Yeah, he's a useful idiot to Horus to do his bidding, basically, until he starts to learn more, right? And he's really good at what he does to a fault. Like, he's really good at what he knows, but he doesn't know everything. Like,
he has his struggles with, like, as new information gets shed to him about how things are going and how he perceived things to be, and it kind of messes with his worldview. He has those moments where he's like, I didn't know it was this way. And that's basically all that ever happens. He's just like, I didn't know it was this way. He doesn't really, it doesn't ever bubble up into becoming a crisis. And it's just like, for me, Loken needed like one chapter where he just went to Horus or something and said, I resign, or something like that. Like, I'm not cut out to do this. Pick somebody else. And then, Horus said to him, like, no, you're perfect for this job, or something like that. I do not allow you to quit.
Yeah, I will say that Loken's like character arc is definitely not done in this book. Like, he has more books to flesh out his character arc, and you're kind of just hinting at, like, in this book, it hints at his arc, and you don't really get to see it yet, which obviously you don't know that reading the first book. So I think that's a perfectly solid criticism of like him not really growing as much as a character. But you start to see it in this book, but it never really comes to fruition. Like, it never really fleshes itself out as a fully fledged whatever idea, I'm trying to say.
Like, I don't remember what part of the book this was in, but there's like this little small chapter that talks about how, and this is talked about throughout, and if you know anything about 40k, it's just kind of like how before 40k the emperor was viewed as, he wasn't viewed as like a god. He wasn't supposed to be viewed as a god. There was supposed to be no god, no religion, nothing, like, because they thought that made them weak.
He himself was anti-religion. Like, he taught the imperial truth that there were no gods, and that science is the truth, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then once he becomes part of the Mournival, he learns of this like secret sect within the Luna Wolves where they meet and they just kind of perform like almost these religious rituals and stuff like that. Not just his initiation ceremony, but there's like a whole nother like there's
another aspect to that
skull and bones society within the Luna Wolves, and he's just like, what the heck? Like, we're not supposed to be doing any of this. And I feel like really, that is something that would cause enough of a crisis within an individual. Like, whether it's you aren't religious and then you're like learning that, oh, my entire affiliation is religious. Like, I feel like that would cause enough of a crisis that you'd be like, I can't be a part of this anymore. Or like if it was just you were one religion and then it was like, oh, it's actually this different religion. Like, I'm Christian, and then I find out that it's actually paganism that my whole group is doing. Yeah. You'd be like, what the heck? Like, I'm going to have a mini crisis because my entire worldview is shattered. And he just kind of, like, takes the blows. He's like, okay. And it's just like, I feel like that would have been the point in time where Loken would have been like, Horus, I'm not cut out for this. You're going to have to find somebody else to be your fourth member of the Mournival.
I think, without getting into spoilers necessarily, but I think it does affect him more than he leads on necessarily. I think you see it a little bit in the scenes that he has around that idea. And we can get on in the spoiler section. We're not in the spoilers yet, but when we get to there, we can talk about that a little bit more in detail. But I think he does hint at that a bit.
Let's try to get forward into the spoilers section. So before we move into the spoilers section, what would you say your personal enjoyment and rating was with this book?
So I really liked it. I think it has arguably the best finale out of the first 3 books. The first 3 books are basically a trilogy. Apart from the third book, which is the trilogy, it's the trilogy finale, basically, right? Which is super good. But this has such a good finale. I really love the finale of this book. Both part 1 and part 2 are very iconic in my mind. This is one of my favorites out of the 3. I think this is maybe my favorite. The third book is really good too. Yeah, I really liked it. I highly recommend it. I would probably rate it a 4.2 out of 5. And I'm taking some off because the parts that I don't like about it is and people kind of call it a different name, but it's all the like the bolter stuff that happens. And it's like, oh, like this guy shoots the thing and he turns around and he slashes this thing with a chain axe or whatever, like a chain sword. Oh, and then he
action scenes basically.
yeah, yeah. Oh, he flips over this thing and he punches this thing, and I'm like, okay, like, yeah,
Get on
they're
with it.
badass. Like, okay, like let's move on. Like, they're really badass, and their bolters are they shoot really hard, and oh my god, they tore them to shreds, and that stuff is like, it's fine. There's certain parts that like I do want to know what the action is like because there's stakes, but sometimes there's no stakes to the action, and I just kind of get bored. And I like action, but like when there's no stakes to what is happening, I'm just like, okay, they're fighting. Yeah. Like we'll talk about later a scene that is an action scene, and I love it. It's probably my favorite scene of the book because there's stakes to it. But there's so much in it in the book. This is probably a Horus Heresy thing in general, but there's a lot of just the bolter stuff that you're just like, okay, I'll get on with it. You're shooting stuff. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where like I think I get a lot of my negatives in the book.
Yeah, I would say, so to give my rating, I would probably say I don't want to be mean and like give it a low rating. Like I'm thinking either between like between a 3.8 and a 4-star for me.
Hey, well, all right. That's actually pretty solid. I was expecting you to say like 2.8, and I was gonna be like, whoa.
I think part 2 was a lot of wasted like real estate in the book, other than introducing some characters. Like you're talking about the bolter scenes. Part 2 is a lot of bolters, like bits.
Yes,
and it's just like,
I 100% agree.
Oh my gosh, part 2 was a slog to get through, but it introduces some characters, and only because I know who the characters are was I interested in getting through that section and learning more about one of the specific characters that's introduced in part 2. So it's just like, that is the only reason part 2 is interesting. The rest of part 2, when you get to part 3, you find out that part 2 is kind of a waste of time.
Yeah.
In a way, and you're just like, wow, like that sucks that I had to listen to all that, other than I got some character development out of a specific person. The other issues I would take with it, like, is what I've already said with Loken. I wish he was just a little bit more fleshed out as a character, and maybe, like you said, he'll become better fleshed out in future books. I want to see just like, he's not relatable. A perfect person is not relatable as a human being for me because I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, then you're the emperor of mankind. So I want to see him make mistakes and be a little bit more relatable, even though he is a space marine or whatever. Like, yeah, he's like superhuman, but still, it's just like, as the POV character, you want to be able to put yourself in his shoes. So
yeah.
If I was Loken and my entire worldview was just kind of like shattered, I probably would have been like, I'm not doing this. I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
He never even had that moment, so that kind of bothered me. So part 1 is a bit of a slog to get through. I think if I hadn't been kind of like in a binge spree like you said, I would have gotten probably stuck at that part with Carcassy. because I do recall reading that chapter and being like, what the heck is going on right now?
Yeah, it is a bit of a slog. It doesn't get out of the slog until you get to basically the end of part 1. And the end of part 1, you're like, whoa.
Yeah,
like,
the end of
holy
part
crap.
1, I'm like, all right, I want to listen to part 2. And then part 2 is just like,
it kind of goes back into a slog.
You're like, oh my gosh, like, just like you get one character's name and you're like, I'll keep listening just to see what happens with him. And honestly,
Right.
not a whole lot of character development there in part 2, but part 3 I think makes up for the faults of part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
Even though it was short, I think the end of part 3, because like the beginning of part 3, I was just like, I think I was talking to you before I finished it. I had like the last 2 or 3 chapters to go, and I'm like, part 3 seems really short. Nothing's happening. And then I got to like where everything happens in part 3, and I was like, oh wow, that was that wrapped it up pretty well.
Yeah, it comes to a pretty rapid climax right at the end.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now I think we're going to get into the spoiler section. So if you haven't read the books yet and you don't want to hear any spoilers, now is your time to pause the video. We'll put a chapter in for you so you can get to the conclusion, and the conclusion will be spoiler free, so you can hear just kind of any of our final thoughts and closing statements for the podcast. But we're going to get into the spoiler section. So let's start with part 1. So do you want to just kind of give a quick synopsis, like all the way through of part 1, Brooke?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the book, you are following Loken and the other 3 captains, which is Abaddon, Torgad, and Aximand. It's the other Mournival captains, and they were chosen at random, but they're obviously, I think it's kind of obvious that they were not chosen at random, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. They go to slay the false emperor. It's kind of a bait and switch.
Yeah, because the first scene is very deceiving.
Yeah, you're kind of like, oh my god, they're fighting the emperor already, and then you're like, oh wait, they're not. It's a bait and switch. It's tongue in cheek, like, oh, the Horus Heresy is going to happen. It's almost like foreshadowing. It's, it rhymes and whatever.
George Lucas. Yeah, scene 1 is all like, they don't really say the false emperor or whatever, but they talk about their assaulting like the Imperial Palace, and there's these things that are like the Golden Boys, but they're silver instead, and they can go invisible, and you're like, oh, they're fighting Custodes, and it's like, what the heck's going on? And
they're hyper elite, like the hyper elite guards, and you're like, oh my god, is this like actually the Custodes that they're fighting? Because they're getting their asses kicked by them a little bit.
They lose like quite a few people to these like Custodes like guys.
Yeah. So like they assault the Emperor's palace. Loken is the first one there. When they assault him, the Emperor, they notice that the guy that's sitting on the throne is not actually the Emperor. The Emperor is actually in like the same armor as all the guards. So then they get in a fight. Horus shows up and kills the Emperor. He like basically like deep strikes in and kills the false Emperor. And then after that, so they then basically subjugate the rest of the planet. The Imperial Fists help them subjugate the planet, so they're kind of like the guard duty, and they bring down the Remembrancers, the Iterators. I think this is where Kirill Cinnamon is introduced.
Yeah, they want to learn about what transpired in the battle, basically.
Yeah, and Kirill Cinnamon is there to basically iterate to the population, like, this is the Imperium of Man, and we're here to give you the truth. And, like, so he's basically telling all of them why they're being subjugated. Or maybe it's somebody else, because I think they even say, like, oh, he's not even that good of an iterator. I don't remember. Maybe it's not him. But there's an iterator that comes down and talks. And this is then goes in with Ignacy Carcassy. And then he kind of wanders around the city because he's in the population. Oh, go ahead.
Well, one interesting thing, too, is Loken is recounting what happened to him in this battle to kill this false emperor. Before that, there's like this little kind of like Top Gun volleyball in the sand moment where like Abaddon's like, "You can't beat me to the Emperor."
Oh yeah.
And Loken's like, "I will beat you to the Emperor," and they have like a manly race in a battle to get to the Emperor first. But anyways,
You can be my wingman any day or whatever.
yeah, it's like, "Wow, you're real badass, Loken. You would look real good on the Mornaval." So there's that little bit, but then there's just like in talking with the remembrancer or whatever about the battle, Loken does have like this one question, like, why are we doing this? Like we could have just left them alone and like it would have been fine.
Yeah, he's kind of questioning like why did we have to like kill so many people or like slaughter the Emperor? He was no threat to us. Like why did we have to do this?
But this is the problem with Loken. He has these moments where he's like, why did we do this? Like he's having almost an existential crisis. Like, why are we doing the things we're doing? We don't believe in religion, and now we believe in religion. What the heck's going on? He has like all these things that would become an existential crisis to any normal person. He just buries them real frickin' deep.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely does.
This would have been the book to do it. Like when he is just becoming a member of the Mornaval. Like there had to, I don't know, there should have been a moment where he was like, I'm not cut out for this, Horus. Like, I don't think I should be on your Mornaval. And he's just like, no, you
I
need
think
to be
he's just
here
too
because
loyal.
you're my most useful idiot.
I think he's just so loyal that he's like he won't step away because he trusts Horus too much.
But I almost think because of that loyalty, like if he was truly that loyal, that is his flaw, that he would have wanted to step down to become basically naive, to what is actually going on again. Like, just make me a captain again so I can just go out and fight and not know any of the inner workings of the Mornaval or what is actually going on in our legion. Like, I just want to go back to being ignorant of everything.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have that moment.
And he can't go back, unfortunately.
Yeah. But he could have at least confronted someone and been like, I want out.
Yeah. And he doesn't necessarily go through that crisis in this book, for sure. But
maybe
it's
later.
only the beginning of his arc, basically, is what I'll say.
Yeah.
So just picking back up on the overview. So you follow Carcassy, and he wanders through the city that they just conquered. And he's basically writing poetry, and he's like, "Oh my god!" Like
getting drunk.
He's getting drunk, and he's like, "Oh my god, the words are flowing so easily for me." And then he starts basically going down this negative path. Yeah, and he's just like talking shit about how every empire falls eventually, and the Imperium of Man is no different, and they'll fall too. And then he gets the shit kicked out of him by some Imperial army guys who hear him. And they're like, that's fucking, that's heretical. And they are so mad at him, they nearly kill him by beating him to death. It's insane.
Well, the thing that's heretical that he's saying is just like, he's like, you will not subjugate this planet, pretty much. Like,
yeah.
And they're like, what you talking about, Willis? They're like, we're going to subjugate this planet. And he's like, you can't subjugate this planet. And they're just like, that's heresy. They're just like, we're going to curb stomp you right here, right now.
Yeah, they beat the hell out of him. Like, quite literally. He's like hospitalized because of it.
They kind of leave the chapter leaving you thinking he's dead.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that was, I never got to that part when I first read it. And when I got to when he's like spouting all the like, oh, it's going to all fall eventually. You're just like every other empire.
What's the name of this planet again?
6319.
6319, yeah.
So for reference, for people who are listening and they want to know about it and they haven't read it, 63 is the 63rd expedition, and this is the 19th planet that they've come across to subjugate, basically.
Yeah. So pretty much after this whole stuff goes down with this remembrancer getting the crap kicked out of him, we basically continue on to a war council meeting, and they're just kind of talking about what do we need to do, and they're like, we need to bring 6319 to heel. Basically, we need to get these people under our control because like the populace and stuff, they aren't listening to them. And then there are these Imperial Guard who are trying to take like this last stronghold back, like in these mountains or whatever.
The Whisperhead Mountains, yep.
Yeah, and they're like, they can't take it, and they keep hearing like really weird radio transmissions where it just keeps saying, what does it keep saying over the radio transmission again?
It says Samus. That's the only name you'll hear. I'm Samus. Samus is all around you. Samus is the man beside you. Samus will gnaw upon your bones.
It's like Metroid comes out and they're
really it does up B and sends it off the platform.
Yeah, exactly. So they're afraid of Samus in the Samus Metroid Prime suit.
Notably, this is Loken's first Mournival meeting.
Mm-hmm.
This is like his first experience of being a part of the Mournival when they have one of these war councils.
Yeah, so they're trying to figure out what to do, and Loken says basically, my division or whatever, we basically started this thing by assaulting the throne room, and we captured the throne room and, you know, got the Emperor. Send my division down so we can finish it and basically put the populace under heel. And then like they're like, yeah, that sounds great, like patting Loken on the back, and Horus is like basically saying like, you did great in your first meeting because that's exactly what I wanted to do, but I needed somebody besides myself to say that that's what we're going to do, because he doesn't want to be perceived as like a warmonger. And if he can have somebody on the council that kind of sees the things the way he sees them and basically voices his own opinion, then it makes it easier for him to lead.
Yeah. Horus wants to be seen as a diplomat. He doesn't want to be seen as a warmonger. It helps his image as the war master that you know, he is not just thirsty for blood, basically. So having Loken speak up about this helps his image.
I think we get introduced to another Primarch too during this scene, the Imperial Fists Primarch.
Yeah, we see Rogel Dorn.
I've heard you talk about Rogel Dorn in future books and your dislike of him, and he comes off okay in this one. I'm like, oh yeah, Rogel Dorn seems fine. I was waiting for him to come across as like a douche or something, but he seemed okay.
He was so forgettable to me that I forgot that he even made an appearance in this book.
Yeah, because like
he basically just shows up and says, Loken, I also wanted you to be on the Mournival. And you're like, okay. And then he leaves.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a little bit of power dynamics that goes on too, because like Rogel Dorn, I think he was one of the Primarchs that felt like he could have been the War Master too, but he in this one just kind of is like, kind of shrugs it off like, whatever, I'm not the War Master, I'm following whatever Horus says. And he's kind of just says like, their only purpose in this book is, hey, we're here to defend 6319 when the planet is basically put under heel. We're going to be here to just hold it after that.
Right. Isn't there some like conflict between the legions where it's like the Luna Wolves are like, oh, we have to do the actual fighting, and then they just get to guard it? You know, like, isn't there kind of like a weird interaction where they're like it's kind of weird that they are the ones that get to like present themselves to the populace?
I think there's like a bit of crap talking between them and like the captains under Rogel Dorn, but it was a while ago since I listened to that part, so I don't really remember it a whole lot, but it's very, very brief. But you do get a introduction to Rogel Dorn in this chapter, which I was like, oh nice, another Primarch. So let's
it like very lightly hints at Legion rivalry, basically.
yeah. So after this, Loken's whole division goes down to assault the what is it, the Whisperhead Mountain or whatever.
Yep, Whisperhead Mountains.
And
They do the
the
assault on it where they join the Imperial Army guys there. Then they have
well,
this is
also this chapter is done from the POV of the Remembrancers because the Remembrancers
oh
are
right.
given permission to go down with them because typically they hear all of the battles. Remembrancers are basically historians, and they could be historians who record history through music, poetry, writing, whatever. But this time,
Photos.
yeah, photos. They get to go down with Loken's division to actually witness the battle themselves. So this is like a great honor to them to get to do it. So this whole chapter, we get to kind of see the battle from basically humans who are like the same level humans as you or I. What it would be like to be witnessing these space marines do battle or whatever. And
Yeah,
the
and
horrors they deal with.
right. I was gonna say, and you get to see like when they're kind of following the trail of Loken's assault, and they are witnessing like the resistance soldiers who have just been like shredded to bits because they're just like normal human soldiers. Then these space marines come up and they're shooting with bolters, and bolters have rounds that when they penetrate a person they explode. So these people are basically like blown to bits because the guns and stuff of the space marines are just so devastating, and they're getting cut in half by like chain swords, and it's just like they're like kind of a little horrified when they're seeing some of the like aftermath. They're like, oh my god, like it is absolutely horrifying what the space marines are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically they're following the space marines, seeing the aftermath, and then I don't really remember. I'll probably get some of this scene wrong, but
i
as
I can help you out if you want.
yeah, go ahead and help me out. Like to me, it felt like so. This is when we kind of get introduced to chaos.
Right. So they basically Loken and his assault force has just captured the mountains, and his sergeant Xavier, I think Xavier Jubal,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he is he calls over Loken. He contacts him, and he's like saying that he sees Samus.
Oh yeah.
And so then he confronts him in like a room in the mountains in one of the caves, and he's just going insane. And eventually Jubal starts shooting the guards that were with Loken, and he starts screaming that Samus is here and that he's like a demon basically. And then Loken fights him, and eventually incapacitates him. Um, and then with the remembrancers that are accompanying the expedition, they're now at this point they're getting into the caves, and they're walking through the caves and whatnot. Loken asks for Sindamin to come and like help him understand what the hell just happened with Jubal. Um, and Cinnamon is like, oh, I think I think he was infected by a disease. And he's like, I don't know what disease would make him do this because we're space marines, so we don't really get sick. Um, and then as they're talking, that's when Jubal gets back up and his body transforms because he's like possessed by the demon. And that's when he goes on his rampage, and he goes out and he kills a couple of remembrancers, and he's about to kill Keeler, Euphrates Keeler.
The
And that's
photographer.
when right, and she's taking pictures of the whole thing because she's a remembrancer. And then
She kind of
Loken
blacks
kills it.
out.
Yeah, and Loken kills it like right before it kills her, basically. Um, and that's basically the end of that scene. But
Well,
that like
also they're kind of introduced like when he turns into the demon or whatever. he just had like all of these teeth, and it just kind of reminded me of like some Nurgle like being, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's what it seemed like to me, because he was like dead and then he came back to life, and he had all these
His
like
body bloats.
teeth. Yeah, his body bloats, and I'm like, oh, it's like a Nurgle type thing or something. So like that was really cool to me. Like the end of part 1 there, when we finally get to see that all kind of blow up, was pretty cool.
Right. And it kind of just explodes in Loken's face, and he has no idea what the hell he's looking at. And this is part of his like worldview getting shattered, because he can't rationalize what the hell is happening at all based on his imperial truth.
The whole like radio transmissions where it's like, Samus, Metroid Prime is gonna kick your ass. He's just like, these are just tactics, you know, they're just psychological tactics to make us back off. Don't worry about it. Like, he doesn't believe it's anything, and they're like, oh, Samus translates to the devil, and they're like, that's crap. He's like, there's no devil, there's no religion, so whatever. So this kind of is the start of Loken's crisis. Is just like, okay, maybe the Samus thing is the devil. Who knows? Like, what did I just witness?
Right. And then when Loken comes back to the ship, he's confronted immediately by Abaddon and then Horus later about the things that he saw, and he's telling him to keep quiet about it because they already know.
Basically tells him it didn't happen.
Yeah, he's like, you didn't see that. And he's just like, what do you mean? And he's basically like, don't talk about it. He's like, and Horus tells him basically that he knows what happened, and he's like, yeah, he was possessed by something from the warp. And Loken's like, there's nothing in the warp besides just raw energy. And he's like, no, there are things in the warp, but we just think that we just call them Xenos. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really, like,
we just don't understand them. They're Xenos, but they're even harder for our mind to comprehend.
Yeah, and he's like, and Loken doesn't understand it because it's so different than anything he's ever experienced that he's like, that doesn't make any sense, even from like looking at it from like an alien perspective. And you know, when you mix in the warp, he just like it totally shatters his view, because he views the warp as just like this pure warp energy, and then he's like, oh my god, there's entities in the warp. It blows his mind.
Is there much more to part 1 after that?
That's it for part 1. After that, they leave 6319 because that was the last bit of the rebellion.
Yeah, that's where I was like, man, I would have liked more on 6319 because it was just getting good.
Yeah, they kind of leave right after that, and they go immediately to murder, and you start following the Emperor's Children, which has Eidolon, who is the like Lord Commander Eidolon. He's not I think he's like first captain or something. And then you have Tarvitz and Lucius, and their 2 companies, and they go down to murder to try to find some blood angels that went missing on the surface. There was like a distress call basically, and it went silent, or like basically they lost contact with some blood angels that were on murder. And the Emperor's Children got there. They're like a task force, and the 63rd Fleet, which is the Luna Wolves, are on their way to murder to link up with the Emperor's Children, and then they should combine go down and see, try to figure out what happened to the Blood Angels. But the Emperor's Children and all their hubris, they decide that Eidolon especially decides that they're not going to wait, and they want to go basically get all the glory for themselves and go find out what happened to the Blood Angels. So they go down immediately. They don't wait for the 63rd Fleet. So they go down to the planet.
Yeah, on the planet they encounter a species that's awfully Tyranid-like, but isn't Tyranids, that are called the Mega Arachnid.
I thought they were Tyranids for the longest time when I was reading it.
I looked it up, and they're like, Mega Arachnids aren't Tyranids.
Like, I did too.
Okay.
I literally looked it up.
I was like, whatever. They're
They're
basically
nids.
Tyranids in my mind, but whatever. So they're mega arachnids, and they're like some of the fiercest fighters. They're very like strong in melee combat. So one of the characters we're introduced to throughout this part is Lucius, and it's like the entire group of the emperor's children are just kind of like horrified by what's going on a little bit, and
Yeah.
they kind of like they I don't know if they see blood angels the whole time, but they do see blood angels dead at some point, and they feel like their bodies are desecrated, and they're just like horrified by it. They're like, oh my gosh, like Space Marines should never be seen dead this way, and their bodies should not be put on display like this. But like Lucius is just like reveling in this combat. It's just like it's a hellscape basically of this alien fauna and like thick alien fauna and these mega arachnids that come out and just strike them at all times, and they fight in ways that are just like inhuman, and and Lucius is a master duelist. He's very very good with a sword, and he just feels so tested by the opponent that he is just like reveling in the combat because he believes it's making him a better duelist. Like at one point, I think he cuts off one of the like legs of one of these mega arachnids, and he's using its leg as a sword, and he's like dual wielding his sword and one of the mega arachnid legs to fight them off, and he's like adapting his techniques to like the techniques that he's learned from them. Like we said, this is a big bolter part where it's just like combat after combat after combat. Right. There's like a part at the end where they like find all of these, almost like a spider web, where all of these blood angels are dead up in the fauna. I don't know, like the mega arachnid are going to be eating them or something, saving them for later to eat them or whatever. And it just bothers his captain, Lucius's captain, so much that he decides that he wants to use.
Well, it's actually not even Lucius. Lucius is a captain. It's the other captain, Tarvitz. Yeah. Tarvitz is bothered, yeah.
Tarvitz is so bothered that he wants to use his entire division's or task force's ordnance to blow up all of the fauna to basically, give these blood angels kind of like a rightful grave or burial or something like that, instead of leaving them to the whims of these mega arachnid Xenos that they hate. And he does it and blows it all to smithereens, and then kind of after that they all just kind of get knocked out.
It's actually like a lucky thing that they do that, because the little fauna things that they like, all the blood angels were like impaled on and all that, they were the source of those electromagnetic storms that were around the planet. So there's like the whole planet was like covered in these storms, and it was blocking the Vox, like
they
from
couldn't
the planet,
contact anybody.
Right. So it's actually kind of lucky that they did that, because when they did that, then the Luna Wolves see it, because they're there at that point.
It was
they
like
see this like the fading of the
it cleared up the storm, and the explosion was so big they're like, what's that?
Like, there they are, basically. And then they Torgadon leads his company down to the planet via drop pod, and they come in and land on the planet to save Eidolon and Lucius and Tarvitz and all them. What's left? There's not much left at that point. They've been fighting for a while.
Now, I think there's some parts in this part 2.
That's one storyline.
This part 2 is very long, and there's a lot of this battle stuff going on. Does part 2 also contain the little like subplot with Loken being introduced to this like skull and bones type society within the Luna Wolves?
Yes. Yeah. So when they are en route to murder, he goes through Jubal's like possessions, and that's when he finds the token that is like the token for the lodge. And when he asks like some people about it, they're like, I can't say. And that's like the thing. Like if you are in the lodge, then you can't speak of the lodge, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And he learns that there's some other people in the lodge. When Loken starts talking about it with some of the other Mordaval, little Horus, Aximand, he decides to bring Loken to one of the lodge meetings. And so then they go through all their like religious weird stuff to like get him in. Like it was like, oh, who's approaching or whatever, and it's like, you know, they like have their basically like password, and then they like say the password basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he gets there, and then he realizes that Torgadon's also there, and it kind of like disturbs him that he's like what the hell, like
Is
there's
all the
this like,
leadership here?
yeah, he's like kind of weirded out by it because he never knew about it until he just kind of happened upon it. And they tell him that the purpose of it is to like strengthen their brotherhood. They can talk freely without having to worry about rank, and it's something that, you know, they think is very human to be like, you know, like the fraternal part of it is like a very human thing, and they need to, you know, relate to their human side as well as, you know, obviously what is bred into them as Space Marines. Like they need to obviously be great soldiers, but they also need to still be, you know, cultivating that human side of them. Loken's not happy with any of it. Basically, he doesn't outright like say like this needs to stop, and I'm gonna turn you in, and I'm gonna blow up the lodge or whatever. Like he basically is just like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to see it. He's like, I don't care. Don't involve me, basically, is what he does. And then he kind of goes off on his own. He's kind of he's kind of distressed at like the idea of this even existing, and he had no idea. He's just like, what? Like this is antithetical to the imperial truth, and it really bothers him.
Yeah, he's like having a little mini crisis. Then he's like, "This is fine," and then he just continues on.
Yeah, I mean, he's not happy about it.
No.
This is also when he leaves them, and Loken then ends up going to Cinderman, and he starts reading up on demons and anything that he can find about demons.
Is this when she shows him the photos and stuff that she took?
That's Keeler. Then she is like, she's said to be like drinking very heavily, and she's sleeping around like crazy with all the soldiers that she can find, basically, because she's like trying to cope with what the hell happened. And then she was apparently given an explanation of what happened, that it was some wild beast,
and she didn't believe it.
Yeah, she didn't believe it at all. So then she shows Loken the pictures that she took, and he can see like there's like a faded like image of like Jubal inside of this monster. Like he starts to see like, and it's like fading like between like frames, but it's not like a motion blur. Like, it's more like
he's like, yo, what's wrong with your piece of trash camera? And she's like, I'm a photographer. I know that my camera is fine, and that's just
my focus was perfect, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like another mini crisis that Loken just suppresses within himself, and he's just like, he asks her like, how did you deal with it? And basically she goes, I found God. That's how she dealt with it. And
well, does she even say that to him at this point?
Sort of, yes. I think
because I know she does like the secret praying afterwards, like she has the cabinet.
Yeah, I think she does at this point. She basically reveals to him that she sees the Emperor as a god, and she just kind of like, you know, she doesn't say that he's a god exactly, but she's just like, I'm just so thankful for the Emperor and stuff like that. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I know Loken is like, he's worried that he's gonna have to kill her, because he's like, well, I have to like protect this from getting out, because Abaddon and Horus gave me the rundown, and it's like, do I need to like silence her, basically? But then she just gives him the picture, which is her photography equipment, basically.
She kind of wants him to destroy the evidence.
Yeah, she's like, you take it. I don't want it. She's like, I'm not gonna say
Hmm.
anything. And that actually ends that. Like, he doesn't have to do anything to her. She goes back to, he leaves, and then she goes and prays, basically.
Yep.
Starts praying to the Emperor.
So
Um,
so then back to the events on Murder with all the Blood Angels getting massacred by the Mega Arachnids. We kind of get into like another War Council meeting, and Sanguinius shows up, and he's just kind of like, my boy. So we get introduced to another Primarch, and he's just really, really sad that all of his
yeah,
Blood Angels got massacred by the Mega Arachnids, and you kind of
he's very wrapped up in his feels.
yeah, and you kind of get introduced into Horus's relationship with Sanguinius. He kind of is like enamored with I think that's probably the best way to say it, enamored with Sanguinius. He's like one of his closest brothers, and you kind of see like he'll do
Yeah,
anything for Sanguinius, and he's just kind of like, Sanguinius is like, let's crusade murder, basically, and Horus is like, yeah, and they just like, basically after that they're like, for 6 months we beat the crap out of all the Mega Arachnids on Murder.
for 6 months we murdered murder. We spanked all those bugs to death.
And we'll spare you from some more chapters of action.
Yeah, it basically is like, Sanguinius and Horus led battles down there, and it's supposed to be like, oh my god, they did incredible feats of battle, and it's like, okay, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, like, while we're here, like, what do you think of
Well,
part two?
there's also another part in part two, I think, where we kind of get a behind closed doors meeting with the Mournival, and I believe is a part which was, I think, a pretty good part where Horus talks about the responsibility that's been laid upon him from the Emperor to be his war master, and you can kind of see how it's weighing heavily on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't always know or feel like he is making the right decisions. He feels like he's made mistakes already, and the Emperor didn't. In their minds, the Emperor never made any mistakes. So, like, he just became War Master, and he's like, I already made 2 mistakes.
Yeah. Another important scene that I wanted to talk about in part two, you get some interactions with the Emperor's children and the Luna Wolves,
Yeah,
and they come on to the Luna Wolves ship, the vengeful spirit, and they start doing some duels. And Lucius is in the dueling like cage or whatever, and he duels Erebus, who is the chaplain from the Word Bearers, and he duels him and he beats him. And Lucius is like super cocky because he was on murder and he was learning all these things, and he's trying to test his fighting basically against some of the best people that are around. And he's feeling
Mary,
super cocky.
then Bobby Sue
Yeah,
duels with him.
Loken basically is like, they like volunteer Loken to go fight, and Loken's like, I don't really want to, and they're like, no, yeah, definitely, you do it. And he's like, okay, like, he's like, I'm not gonna, like, he's like, whatever, like, I'm not gonna fight, like, I'm not gonna fight you in the way that you want me to, basically. He's like, no,
Yeah.
give me your best shot. Yeah, I'll get you. Give me your best shot. Give me your best right hook. And he's like basically
Yeah.
just like taunting him.
Then he literally just gives him his best right hook, and he Master Chief B buttons him in the
Yeah.
face.
Yeah, instead of like, the sword that they're given to like duel with, he literally just punches him in the face, and it kind of humiliates Lucius, and he's like
F
ultra pissed off.
Loken.
Like, he is so mad.
He's like, I'm the best duelist, and I got beat with a Halo B button.
Yeah.
So mad.
he it This is okay. I know we're kind of riffing on this scene a little bit. This is my favorite scene of the book. I love this scene. It is so fun to watch 3 different legions have an interaction, and then you see, you can see how the Emperor's children view themselves because Lucius is just spouting it. Like, we're perfect. We're the best fighters. Oh, I'll pick apart every one of your strategies or whatever. And then Loken is pretty subdued, and he's confident in his own abilities, but he's not going to rub it in people's faces. And Erebus is playing a part there where he's like, he's trying to like just play into everything. He's
Just
trying to be
in.
like, yeah, he's blending in. He's trying to be like he's trying to bridge multiple legions together. Like he's there. He's actually tightly knit with the lodges. He's a confidant to Horus, so he's trying to like bridge a bunch of legions with each other. So he's kind of playing a part there to bridge the relationship between the Emperor's children and the Luna Wolves. And then you have like, I think Torgadon is in there, and he's egging on the fight and everything, and Tarvitz is there, I think, and he's kind of egging on the fight a little bit. And then when Loken steps in, and Lucius is just like, he's just like bobbing and weaving. He's like super amped to get to fight. It's like a game to him. He's obviously an insane fighter, and he's trying to just and like the way he approaches the fight though is like, he's like, oh, he's gonna like he'll jab me with the sword, and then I'll like deflect it, and we're gonna like play by this like fair game almost. And then Loken doesn't, and he literally just punches him in the face because he's just trying to get the job done. He's trying to end the fight, and that's how he views a fair fight. It's him. He's just trying to end it. He's trying to get to the final result, and it tells you a lot about how he views a challenge or a problem. He's gonna do the thing that ends it. Basically, like he's just gonna take the problem, solve it as quickly as he can in the simplest manner as he possibly can, and you have the Emperor's children who are like, I'm gonna do the most beautiful flourish to like disarm you,
because we're made in the Emperor's
vision
or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like, it's such a cool scene because it doesn't outright tell you all this stuff about them, but you see it in like, I know meta knowledge about like some of these things, and it was so cool to like actually see this interaction, because you see the differences of legions, you see the differences of personalities between Emperor's children and Luna Wolves.
For me,
and it's just, oh, go ahead.
For me, there's a scene in part 3 that I think is the best scene in the book. I think it was better than that scene.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, I just really love this scene. I love how Lucius reacts to it. It really disturbs him. And I love how Loken like kind of doesn't care. He just like he's just like, we're done. I'm gonna move on. And Lucius is just, he's not gonna move on. He like never moves on because he's totally insulted. It's like his honor was just absolutely destroyed. I love the scene. It's such a good scene.
So pretty much at the end of this part, then another, I'll put in quotes, Xenos species, maybe not species, so something perceived to be Xenos shows up like 6 months after they've been doing this crusade on murder, and it is a divergent human species from Terra. They're divergent from the Space Marines, and they're just kind of like, what the heck are you doing to this planet? We basically subjugated these mega arachnids and we banished them to this planet. Why are you killing them? And that's when we're introduced to the Inter-X.
Yes. Yeah, they are a long-lost human civilization during the Age of Technology, I believe is what it's called. But they like, that was when like the whole point of the crusade is to link up with all human civilizations that have spread out among the stars that got cut off from Terra when the whatever the age is where all the AI turned on humans, and there was a big war against all the men of iron and all that stuff. Like, that's why they're all anti-AI.
Mm-hmm.
But all those human civilizations that spread among the stars got all disconnected, and so this crusade is to join all of humanity together. That's why, it's the Imperium of Man, and that's the whole goal of the Emperor, is to bring all of humanity into one collective empire. And these humans that show up, the Interrex, they show up looking very Xenos, but definitely human. They are definitely a human civilization, and
they kind of
they
have
come
like
in.
this fancy, like in my head I just kind of saw it as like fancy Greek, like Greco-Roman style armor. With them they had these sagittars or whatever they called them, which are basically like centaur like robots that guarded them, and the Space Marines kind of perceive them as being humans. Like their armor and their weapons are all for show. They don't have any actual purpose in war. So
Oh yeah.
a lot of like a lot of part 3 is basically them kind of treating with this other human species. They're all kind of just like feeling each other around and just being like, okay, like are they good? Like, can we trust them? Because at the beginning of the book, we're introduced to another human. I don't know if they're a divergent group of humans, but they have on 6319, they're humans who have their own false emperor. So like humans, they want to bring humans back into the empire, but sometimes they're not right to be brought into the empire. So like they're kind of feeling around things around and being like, okay, can these guys be trusted? Can they be brought into our fold? So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, this is also where you hear from Horus, where he kind of talks about when he was with the Emperor on Cathonia, and it was not long after the Emperor had had found him, I think. But he tells Horus, quote, "Make no mistake, and those stars will be ours," as he's pointing up to the stars. And he basically gives Horus this like sense of like, I don't want to make a mistake, and I can't make a mistake, and if I make a mistake, then we're not going to be able to conquer the rest of the galaxy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where like the failings that he has had on this crusade, like on 6319 with the Mournival member who was killed, on that, he feels super responsible for that. And then like, he basically views the Interrex as like this crossroads of, he really desperately needs to exhaust all peaceful like diplomacy options with them,
Mm-hmm.
before they even consider going to war and conquering this civilization. And he feels like this is almost a test of like, is he good enough to be the War Master? Like, can he actually navigate conquering a fairly peaceful civilization that's different than the Imperium, but bringing them into the fold through peace rather than just going and being bloodthirsty and conquering everything.
Yeah. So I'll get into like the final bit of the book. I don't think there's a whole lot to this part of the book. It's actually really short compared to the other parts. Like the last chapter, 2 chapters, basically Horus with the Luna Wolves, basically everyone who was on murder. So we also have like the Emperor's children, Erebus. They go to the Interrex to basically treat with them and do this diplomacy.
Wait, are the Emperor's children there?
Mm-hmm.
I think they might have. Oh, really? Okay, I thought they left
so.
at this point.
I thought so, but maybe they left. I thought they were there. But
It could have been.
they're basically treating with them to try to do this diplomacy. And there's just something like where the Interrex, like they feel like the Interrex don't fully trust them. They don't know why. They don't fully trust the Interrex themselves. So they're just trying to feel each other out. And like Horus shows up. He's wearing like robes instead of armor and stuff because he wants to like give them a, I'm good. Like, see, I'm not showing up in my war gear to do diplomacy with you. And there's just like cultural clashes between them, and like basically it all comes to a head where Loken goes to, I don't know.
They go to the dignitary's home.
So they're at the dignitary's home, and Loken is just kind of off on his own, talking to another Interrex, like captain, someone that's kind of his equal with the Interrex. And essentially they're talking about, their differences together. And kind of one of the issues they bring up is like, why do you call your leader War Master? And they're like, that's just the name. Like, he's the War Master. It's
a rank.
He's the rank. It's the leader of us. And he's like, but like, war is bad. Like, why would you want to be calling him War Master? Like, that's a horrible name. And so there's like this clash there. And then Loken talks to him further, and they're just kind of like, why are we like, let's cut to the chase. Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we doing this evaluation of each other? And Loken more or less says some stuff along the lines of like, we've seen some evil things on our crusades, and we want to make sure that you aren't one of them. And he basically brings up chaos, and like, we want to make sure that you aren't evil and stuff. And
are you saying the Interrex did or the Loken did?
Loken says something along those lines, and then the Interrex guy is like, "Oh my gosh!" She's like, "So you don't even know about chaos, basically."
Yes, yeah.
And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "That's what we've been worried about the whole time." He's like, "You, like, your name, War Master. You're on these crusades. You just came across as like evil to us. So like, we were worried that you were chaos." And Loken's like, "No, we're not chaos." And so like, he's like, "This has just been a big misunderstanding. I'm going to go talk to my leader." And then when he goes to talk to his leader, he gets called on his like voice comm or whatever, and basically there's some sort of like giant misunderstanding has happened, and this Interrex guy says to Loken, like, "Give me your weapons and surrender to me now." And Loken's just like, no. And he like, he puts his hand on the hilt of his sword, and he's like, "I will not surrender my weapon. Do not make me kill you," basically. And he demands him to surrender his weapon again, and they get into a fight with each other. And it's like another cool, it's kind of a cool, I thought this was a cool fight because it was two different,
it is a cool fight.
They're two different humans fighting with each other, but because they have been diverged for so long, like they describe like the different sword fighting techniques as being so foreign to them that it's very difficult for either one of them to gain an advantage on the other. And eventually Loken gains the advantage on him, and he basically like knocks this guy out. He cuts his hand off.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to do like a coup de grace to just like give him a mercy stroke and kill him. And he actually shows him, I would say, mercy by not killing him. He makes the decision to not kill him. And some of the Sagittar guards come in, and he's like holding him hostage basically. And he's like, "I don't want him to die. But he's losing a lot of blood, and if you take care of him, he will survive." And they like lower their weapons and they rush in to take care of him, and then Loken runs off, and he's like trying to call Horus and the other Mornival, and he's like, "What's going on? What's going on? I'm being attacked, and is everybody okay?" And he's basically like, the primary mission is to locate Horus and get him out of here safely. So like basically all of the diplomacy is completely falling apart, and there's hints of that something was stolen from the Interax, basically. And they say like, you are chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, this is just a misunderstanding, and like so eventually he links up with Horus, and they get Horus out of there safely, and they get back to their ship, and they're just, all of the Mornival are just kind of like, what the hell happened? Even Horus is like, what the hell happened? Why did our diplomacy break down so quickly? What went wrong? And that's basically the end of the book.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a scene where Loken is talking about the story to his remembrancer. It's like after the battle's already happened,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where he's talking about how he views Horus, and he says that the way he saw him on that day where he, rallied everybody together, and he was absolutely against having to fight the Intrex, but it kind of forced his hand, and like the way he, faced that, and he was very noble in his purpose to try to bring them into the fold, but he had to make a tough decision and do all that. But he's like, he basically says that he will always view Horus as being courageous and noble in that moment, and that is a memory that will stay with him forever,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what. And
Also,
it gives you insight on how he and the other Luna Wolves view Horus, and what basically influences them to change their name.
mm-hmm. Then also, to wrap things up with the Interax, like I think she asks him, like, do you think you have any chance of doing diplomacy with them? And he's basically like, we killed so many of them, there's no way we can do diplomacy with them. Like, that's all hopes to have diplomacy with the Interax are lost. And
Right.
then she kind of asks like, well, what happened? And he says, they say that we stole a weapon from them.
Yeah, and Loken thinks that they're lying, like that there's a huge misunderstanding. But then we kind of get like it's almost like a post-credits scene.
Mm-hmm.
And first chaplain Erebus of the Word Bearers is somewhere inside the Vengeful Spirit in some like lonely section of that, and he has this weapon. He has the Anathame, I think is what it's called, Anathame, which is the weapon that he stole.
Mm-hmm.
And he is looking at it, and this weapon is supposed to be like semi-sentient. It has like an actual
Those might
being
be
stored
spoilers
inside of
for
it.
me because they don't tell you any of that in this book.
Well, he basically looks at it and he goes,
Ooh.
like, basically like, oh my god, what can I do with this? But yeah, I mean that's basically the end of it, I think. And I mean, after that, I think it ends with Loken saying to the Remembrancer that the next place they're going, at the request of Erebus, is to go to the Davin system.
Yeah. Yep,
But that's it.
And I really liked that scene because I thought that was really good foreshadowing, better than like the foreshadowing at the beginning with the like really heavy-handed like, we're going to kill the emperor. And you're like, what? This was like better foreshadowing to me, where it's like the guy is like, we see chaos in you, and then they come to these two guys just talking to each other, and he's like, oh, you guys don't even know what chaos is. Like, there's no way. Like, you guys aren't bad. But then like there is somebody within their ranks that is bad, and they don't even know about it yet. So it's just like there's like this small bubbling chaos faction that's growing within their ranks that they don't even know about themselves. So I don't know. I like that it's like slowly corrupting itself, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the person who actually kind of punches through all the BS that's kind of been back and forth during the negotiations is not Horus. It's Loken.
Mm-hmm.
Like Loken is the one who's like, he's like, I don't know what chaos is. Like, what the hell's chaos? And then the guy that he's talking to, this guard, is like, you don't know what chaos is? He's like our friends the Eldar told us about chaos and they warned us about it, so we're pretty scared of it. He's like, I don't even know what chaos is. And he's like, this is a huge misunderstanding. And it's not Horus that gets that done. And Horus is supposed to be the great diplomat, right? He's supposed to be the guy who is able to talk to these other races and unite people. It's funny that like Loken, who would probably be considered like a good person, right? I mean, I think he's probably got a pretty good moral compass. Then this
Mm-hmm.
guard is talking to him, and he's like, "Oh, like you're obviously good. So huge misunderstanding. Let me talk to my superiors." And then outside of Loken's control is all this chaos happening. You know, it's all this crap that Erebus kicks off, and then Loken's forced. You know, when he's forced into basically being loyal to, you know, the Luna Wolves, he falls right in line. He fights the guy. He gets out of there, and then they like unite with Horus, and they make a big, you know, charge out of the city to like to get Horus into out to safety. And it's like no question. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Loken has this big misunderstanding, but like once the you know, once everything is kind of played out, he is falling right in line with Horus and the rest of them.
Yeah, I think throughout the book, it just kind of gives you little hints that there are people within the legions who do know what chaos is, and it's mostly like among the leadership because you know with Horus and Abaddon talking to Loken, and he's like, "You didn't see what you saw." Like obviously they've seen it before and they know what it is, so there's got to be other Primarchs and captains who know what chaos is, but they just stifle it from all of the Space Marines, and it's like it just takes one naive Space Marine talking to this Interax guy to go, "Oh, you guys don't know what the heck this is." But it's
Yeah.
like obviously there are people within their ranks that know what it is, and you can kind of see how the two different human species have taken different approaches to dealing with chaos, where the humans that are like direct descendants of the Emperor and from Terra or whatever, they've chosen to deal with it by just like, don't tell anyone about it, just ignore it. And then the Interacts are like, it's this great evil. We have to like make sure no one that we deal with that we think, even if they seem benevolent, like it could be chaos trying to manipulate us. Like we always have to be on guard of chaos. So I think it was interesting seeing that dynamic between two different human species. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think like to like piggyback off of your point there, like it's interesting that the faction, the humans that pronounce the imperial truth are hiding the fact that they know more about the warp, and they're not giving that to public knowledge. So like the truth is like their shaped truth that they want the knowledge, what they want the public to know, like of what knowledge that they want them to have. And then this other Interex uh civilization, they are like, it seems like they're completely open with people knowing the actual truth of, you know, chaos is a real thing, and you know we need to be vigilant against it instead of being just ignorant to it. And like, you know, it's ironic that the faction who preaches the imperial truth is not privy to the actual truth. You know,
mm-hmm.
they don't have the actual truth.
It's
and
like
then they kind of persecute this other civilization because of it.
it's like they want to stifle like religion and stuff like that so much that they view chaos as like hell or whatever, and they just they don't want anybody to know about it, because it's like, well, if there's a hell, then there must be like a heaven or something like that. So it's just completely hidden from everybody because it doesn't fit in with the emperor's agenda, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of is, probably especially when you think about Loken, it's it is sowing the seeds of doubt of, or even if you look at like not even Loken, I guess like more like if you look at like Abaddon or some of the other people, like there's a doubt of like they know the truth. Like Abaddon obviously knows the truth because he was one of the people who talked to Loken after the Whisperhead Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Like he obviously knows the truth, and he knows that the Emperor actively deceives the populace. So like there's obviously something there that like it sows the seeds of doubt in somebody like Abaddon, when he knows that there's actual like deception at the highest level, which is kind of, it's kind of wild. I think that's kind of crazy. It starts to make a little bit of sense when you have these guys who are maybe skeptical, um, or maybe their loyalties lie elsewhere when it comes to the end of the day kind of thing. The cliche, when it comes to the end of the day, their loyalties with Horus.
Mm-hmm.
So it I don't know. I think it's super interesting.
So now that we've basically gone through the entire book, do you have any final conclusions or final thoughts that you would like to share with everybody on the
Yeah,
book?
and we'll do this spoiler free, so we can bring back the people who left us for the spoiler section. So overall thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I really like this book. We just stepped through a long overview of the book. Uh, I think that there's a lot of this book is a lot of setups. Um, and I know that one of your criticisms is of like Loken's character arc. And there's a lot of setups for his character arc that have not been fulfilled. And in a book on its own, that is certainly an issue. But I think once we get to the other books, it'll start to take shape, and I think you'll I hope that you'll enjoy it. Uh, I do like the um the character moments that have like weight to them, like that last scene that we talked about in the last part 3 section. There's a lot of weight to that scene, and it's action that has stakes as opposed to action that has no stakes and it's just bolter stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I mean, this is a really good first book. I rated it a 4.2 for a reason. I think it's a really good setup for the next 2 books, and I'm excited to get to those next 2 books when we talk about them, because it kind of it just like keeps ramping up. There's more stuff introduced. It keeps getting more interesting. There's more threads interwoven, on top of what's already here. And I'm excited to get to those. I encourage people to read this book and follow along with us. I think that journey is going to be a lot of fun. Um, but yeah, definitely like the book. What about you? Overall thoughts?
Yeah, I enjoyed listening to the book. I stand by what I said. Just with, I wish Loken was a better developed character in this book, because um, I think now's the time to introduce like character flaws, because right now he's a very static, kind of boring character to me. I like other characters a bit better. Um, the bolter scenes that we talked about are long, and there's quite a few of them in this book, especially in part 1 and part 2. But there's little bits in part 1 and part 2 that I think make up for those really long bolter scenes. I think it can be forgiven because, well, one, it's the Warhammer universe. You need some action in the book, but
Some
also,
people live for that stuff.
yeah, it's also part of the setting. So it's just without it, you don't really get the feel for the setting of the Warhammer Grimdark universe. So it's acceptable, but there's a lot of it. And in part one and part two, there are bits and pieces of it that just kind of do build up to what does eventually happen in the end. And part three, I think, wraps everything up into a neat bow.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like, if the last two chapters didn't happen in part three, I probably would have been really disappointed in the book. But the way that the end of part three wraps it all up, it has me looking forward to starting the second book. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely like a first book for a series. It's introducing a lot of concepts to like new readers, and if you're not familiar with Warhammer at all, I think it would be okay as an entry point for you. And you need all of that extra detail to bring those people up to speed. So if you are familiar with it, you're just kind of like, let's get to the drama. Let's see what's happening.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I definitely
it.
agree. Yeah, I'm actually really glad that you decided to pick it up, and I'm glad that we're doing this episode. I think it's I'm excited to talk, even if we don't do future episodes. I'm excited to continue talking about this series going forward because I've enjoyed it so far, and I hope that you continue to enjoy it as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're still watching at this point, we'd like to thank you for listening in. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you know when our future episodes come out. But other than that, do you have any parting thoughts, Brooke? Or parting
Um,
words for our listeners?
I would just encourage you guys to comment about your own thoughts on the book if you read it. I would love to engage in a conversation about the book with anybody who would like to in the comments. So if you have been listening this long and you want to talk about the book and maybe some theories of, or maybe some, psyche vowels of certain characters or whatever you want to talk about, I'd be happy to engage in that. Super interested to hear what you guys think about the book, whether you liked it. And again, we really thank you for watching, especially if you watch this long, please please subscribe if you're not already. And yeah, I mean, we really appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you like it enough that we can do a second.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
Bye.